Obviously, the Buffett meeting was this weekend. If you didn't watch that, you can go try to find a replay. So I recommend following everything that Buffett does or says or etc. And there's recently a video in Yahoo Finance that I really enjoyed actually. That this video was really good because you got to hear from Combs and Wexler, which one doesn't often get to hear from, and all three of them in a room is kind of cool. The annual meeting was fine. You know, I to be honest, like there's diminishing returns in listening to people kiss Buffett and Munger's ass for hours and hours, and there's a little bit of diminishing returns and kind of the bad questions, of which there are plenty. So from my perspective, it's somewhat useful. But one of the things that I found pretty useful, other than kind of the banter and the faux Nebraskan Midwestern charm, is the idea that Buffett at his core is sort of a master of the basics, which is something I advocate for quite a bit. And the most interesting things I think he talks about is his sort of grasp on the real nitty-gritty of return. What is return on an asset? What is capital really? He had this really interesting phrase about depreciation that I thought was really fascinating. And depreciation being the opposite of float, which was particularly interesting. He had some interesting comments on interest rates and discount rates. So occasionally you'll listen to Buffett sort of whacks on some of these really elemental parts of finance. And I think some of them are I think just like him and Munger are masters of their craft, and they don't let on as much as going on in their head. And sometimes when you see these parts, you can really tell that they really have a really good understanding of this stuff. Munger had some interesting comments on China, which again, I'd refer you to the video. He basically said the best public equity opportunities right now are in China, which I thought was really interesting. Berkshire doesn't have many Chinese stocks, if any. I don't think so. Anyway, watch the annual meeting, but I think everyone knows when the annual meeting's happening, but you really want to look for these little nuggets of pieces of media, and especially the older stuff you can find. There's this really old Buffett thing I think it's called Super Investors, and let me see if I can find it real quick. Super Investors, Buffett. Yeah, okay, it is Super Investors. And if you can find this, it's super old. Here it is. And it's from quite a long time ago, and it was actually written by Warren Buffett a long time ago, so you can check that out. I don't know when, it doesn't have the date on it, I guess, but it's about as old as it looks. I'm sure it's in there somewhere. But anyway, my point is, if you find this stuff, you can see he still has some dark hair, so there you go. But the point is that there's some really good stuff out there that's older. The newer Buffett stuff is interesting too, of course, because he's just gotten smarter, but there's some really old articles that I'd encourage you to read as well, and you can kind of see how he sort of grew up as well. Okay, so there's some stuff going on in China that's a little weird. I personally am not afraid of any of it. I think there's a pervasive sort of fear right now that the Chinese economy is slowing. The Shanghai Composite is actually flat for the year, whereas the Nasdaq and the S&P are up substantially. And this is causing this big ripple effect in commodities, and specifically Chinese bond yields are up, which is a little scary. So anyway, stay tuned. Sometimes these kinds of they say when the U.S. catches a cold, China gets the flu. So we'll certainly see kind of what happens with China. But I don't think there's a reason to be alarmed quite yet. But the Chinese government's actually causing some of this themselves. They're sort of systematically trying to get risk out of their system. And Buffett actually said, markets have a casino-like atmosphere, and I think in China that couldn't be more true. And the government there is wisely trying to stamp out a little of the excess speculation. So we'll sort of see what happens. Again, some more boring stuff here. I'm not a news reporter, so like I said, I'm not going through the news, just stuff I saw and I think is interesting. I certainly, it wouldn't be a service for me to summarize the news for you every week. I don't think that'd be very fun. Obviously, everyone saw the Apple report, and the China down year over year is pretty interesting. Their own phone companies are really, again, we'll make the case in a minute that phones aren't really phones, but they're just small PCs. That companies like Xiaomi and others are really the impressive companies of China, and that Apple is kind of whatever culturally or price wise, they're just not a great fit for China, which is kind of interesting. All the pharma stuff was in line. I listened to the Facebook call, which I thought was, it's really incredible how much they're growing, and we'll talk a little bit about how and why that's happening, and maybe why I think it will continue, especially vis-a-vis maybe a Google. Gilead is a stock I like a lot. They reported earnings, and I thought the quarter was actually phenomenal. Their HIV business is growing much more rapidly, and they're transitioning patients from the old off-patent drug to the new on-patent drug, and more than just patent tricks, it's actually a good thing. The new drug's better than the old drug, but financially it's also very important that nobody takes the old drug anymore because the patent's gonna expire. So there's that. It'll be always interesting to see Valiant's earnings, and Teva's a large cap company, the biggest generic company, that I'd like to see how they do. One thing that was a little bizarre is Pfizer reported earnings, and Pfizer bought a company called Medivation, which has a drug called Xtandi, and I thought it was a typo when I saw it. They spent like $10 billion to buy Medivation, but the revenue from the product is only $100 million a quarter, so it's $400 a year. So I must be missing something, but a lot of people are commenting about it because it's just a strange phenomenon. It must be a revenue recognition problem, but it's sort of something to sort of pay attention to. Couple quick things here. Some stocks I've looked at. There's this company in France called Abivex, I think it's called, and their stock went from €5 to €15. At one point, it was at €25, and they talked about having an HIV, sort of like an HIV Abivex, an HIV drug that first ever evidence of treatment-induced reduction in HIV reservoirs. They actually had a reduction in patients human beings who had active HIV infection. So pretty crazy. And I've been saying this for a while, that I think that in 10 years HIV will be a treatable, clearable infection. So again, maybe it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I don't know, but it's happening soon. And in fact, it's one of the things that I think Turing should probably work on.